Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Alright, without further ado, let us dive straight into the recap of Spirit Chronicles Volume 28 Part 1. Alright guys, in the previous video, Rio and Lena went to save Christina, but unexpectedly, instead of helping, Lena actually obstructed Rio from rescuing Christina, which ultimately left Christina severely injured. Now in this part, the focus of the story is divided between the major consequences of Rio's decision to save Christina and the political impact that arises after Christina's identity is erased from the world. We also see an important meeting between Lena, Rio, and the people at Gallark Castle that begins to reveal the true rules surrounding familiars, as well as Rio's position as a transcendent being. Now, let us continue to Volume 28, Part 1. The story begins in the Armada Kingdom, specifically in the holy capital of Tenerico. At this moment, Pope Fenris is busy handling various administrative matters in his office when someone suddenly appears, barging in through the balcony. The figure turns out to be Ellie. Fenris immediately complains and reminds her to use the main door next time, especially since he already gave her an important position in the palace, precisely so that she could move officially. However, Ellie does not care at all. She simply shrugs casually, considering palace procedures too troublesome to follow. Without wasting time, Ellie directly asks about Rio's whereabouts. Fenris lets out a long sigh before explaining that Rio is currently in the kingdom of Gallark. Ellie then asks whether Rio's sudden summoning earlier was Lena's doing. Fenris confirms that Lena was indeed responsible. He also adds that he has verified that Lena is still alive, but her interference caused him to lose 2 golems and forced him to agree to a ceasefire. That agreement requires their side to stay away from the capital of Gallark, as long as Lena does not interfere with their dungeon. After hearing that explanation, Ellie responds with a half-indifferent attitude. However, she then asks Fenris to tell her everything about Rio, starting from his background, personality, and anything that Rio considers important. Fenris briefly stares sharply at her and questions whether there is still any possibility of holding a dialogue with Rio. Ellie casually replies that negotiating with Rio sounds far more reasonable than dealing directly with Lena. In the end, Fenris gives up and begins explaining Rio's character to her. Meanwhile, the situation in the wilderness is in a far more critical condition. On the outskirts of the Spirit Folk village, Christina Bertram is on the brink of death after a spear pierces her chest. Rio panics and immediately uses all of his spirit healing magic to close the fatal wound. However, in the middle of that desperate effort, Lena, who is possessing Miharu's body, calmly states that ordinary spirit magic will not be able to bring Christina back to life. That cold remark immediately triggers Rio's anger. He shouts at Lena and blames her, because if Lena had not interfered at the final moment, this tragedy would not have happened. However, Lena is not affected by Rio's emotions at all. Instead, she presents the only extreme solution available, which is to make Christina become Rio's familiar. Lena explains that regeneration as a servant of a transcendent is the only way to save Christina's life. Rio immediately falls silent. He fully understands the horrifying consequences of that decision. If Christina becomes the familiar of a transcendent, then her entire existence and memories will be erased from the world. Her life might be saved, but she will never again live as the first princess of the Bertram Kingdom. That dilemma makes Rio hesitate for a moment, but Lena coldly urges him once more, warning that Christina does not have much time left. In the end, Rio makes his decision. He stops his healing magic, then injures the back of his own hand until it bleeds. Enduring the pain, he embraces Christina's body tightly and transfers his blood directly from mouth to mouth so that the process will be faster. Not long after that, Christina's body begins to emit a faint light. Although she briefly chokes, she manages to swallow the blood, and the light grows brighter. Seeing that the process succeeds, Lena smiles with satisfaction and declares that Christina has now officially become Rio's familiar. The fatal wound in Christina's chest begins to close at an absurd speed, proving that she has lost her human nature as an ordinary person. Rio can only suppress the bitter feeling in his heart. Lena then adds that such high-level regeneration is an absolute effect of a transcendent being's power. Realizing that the commotion could attract the village guards, Lena suggests that they move immediately. Rio agrees and decides to create a stone house as a hiding place outside the village. After that, Lina uses teleportation magic to return alone to the royal castle of Gallark in order to explain the situation to the others. Now, only Rio and Christina remain. Rio lets out a long breath before carrying Christina in his arms, then uses wind spirit magic to dash away from the village toward a safe location. Meanwhile, at Rio's luxurious residence within the royal castle of Gallark, Flora, King Francois, Charlotte, and the other residents are gathered in the dining hall. The atmosphere, which was initially calm, suddenly changes when Lina teleports directly into the corner of the room, shocking everyone present. Although she is using Miharu's body, the aura she emits clearly feels different, filled with confidence as well as a strong pressure. Without wasting time, Lina immediately announces that Christina is still alive. Upon hearing that news, Flora and the others let out a sigh of relief. However, that relief instantly collapses when Lina adds that Christina Bertram's life is actually already gone. That contradictory statement fills the entire room with confusion. Amid the tension, Sora, who has been leaning against the wall, pushes through the crowd to confront Lina. She demands an explanation regarding Rio's whereabouts. Lina calmly answers that Rio is currently deep in the wilderness. That response only makes Sora even more emotional, because Lina returns alone without bringing Rio with her. In an irritated tone, Sora releases the frustration that has accumulated for 1,000 years. She accuses Lina of being a manipulative figure who always hides important information, only provides fragments of facts, and appears whenever she needs something. In response to that anger, Lina merely lets out a lazy sigh. She considers the argument troublesome and casually brushes Sora aside, even coldly reminding her that she could die if she dares to attack, something that would certainly make Rio hate her deeply. Ignoring the argument between the two of them, Flora anxiously asks again about her sister's fate. Lina firmly states that Christina is indeed still alive, but no longer as Christina Bertram, and they will not be able to meet her as long as they remain outside the barrier's boundary. Upon hearing that explanation, Sora immediately understands the situation. In a shocked tone, she accuses Lina of forcing Rio to make Christina his familiar. Lina denies it and states that the decision was entirely made by Rio himself. However, Sora insists that Lina must have cornered Rio until he had no other choice. Faced with that sharp accusation, Lina merely responds with a meaningful smile without denying it any further. On the other hand, Latifa, who is still confused, asks as well, because all this time, she thought that only Sora could become Rio's familiar. Lina then reveals a shocking fact that a transcendent being can have more than one familiar. Considering that Rio has the qualifications of a Dragon King combined with Lina's existence, in theory he could have up to 6 followers, and Christina has now become one of them. Lina also adds that Christina has not regained consciousness yet and is currently being cared for by Rio. She promises that she will bring them back to the castle in about 1 hour. After saying that, without giving anyone a chance to protest, Lina immediately chants teleportation magic and disappears from sight. Lina's sudden departure leaves a frustrated atmosphere in the dining hall. Sora grits her teeth in annoyance, while Flora looks extremely worried about her sister's condition. Latifa tries her best to calm Flora. Realizing that Sora is the one who understands transcendent beings the most, King Francois asks for a further explanation regarding the concept of adding familiar members. However, Sora, who is still in a bad mood, only glares sharply at the king without intending to answer. Seeing that situation, Celia finally steps in. She politely asks Sora to explain, considering that this secret information is truly new to all of them. Because she continues to be pressed, Sora finally shifts the responsibility by mentioning that Aishia also knows that secret. Aishia calmly confirms it, admitting that she does know, but deliberately kept it hidden at Rio's request. Growing more curious, Celia then asks why Rio has to hide something so important. With a sullen expression and a quiet tone, Sora finally explains that from the very beginning, Rio never intended to increase the number of his followers. Rio does not want to involve the people closest to him in that curse. Aishia then completes that explanation. If someone becomes a familiar, then all traces of that person's life will be erased from the outside world, even though their existence will still be recognized while inside Lina's barrier area. Because Rio fully understands how painful it is to be forgotten by loved ones, he does not want anyone around him, to experience the same suffering. After hearing that explanation, Celia asks Sora and Aishia to reveal all the detailed rules regarding familiars so that they can prepare to welcome Christina's return later. Meanwhile, inside the stone house that Rio established, a new problem arises. Rio realizes that he must immediately change Christina's clothes and at the same time examine the condition of her wound. Although during the flight, he continuously channels spirit healing magic, and the wound should have already closed, the fact that Christina's heart was once pierced by a spear cannot be taken lightly. Moreover, the clothes Christina wore during the execution are now torn and soaked in blood, so leaving her in that condition is clearly not hygienic. Ideally, Christina herself would clean her body after regaining consciousness. However, with such a fatal wound, Rio cannot determine when she will wake up. After seriously considering the situation, Rio finally decides to move her to the bathroom. He makes an emergency pillow from a pile of towels, lays Christina's body on the tiled floor, then with trembling hands begins tearing off her blood-soaked clothes. Christina's pale skin, covered in stains of blood, is fully exposed before him. Even though the blood has already begun to dry, Rio desperately tries not to look directly. He uses spirit magic to manipulate warm water, pours liquid soap onto a towel, then starts washing Christina's body with extremely careful movements. After the rinsing process is complete, Christina's clean white skin becomes visible again. Panicking, Rio immediately turns his face away. In his heart, he feels relieved because the fatal wound has completely closed without leaving a single scar. After making sure that all traces of blood are gone, Rio quickly wraps Christina's body in a bath towel and intends to leave the room immediately. However, at that exact moment, a soft groan is heard. Christina slowly opens her eyes. Rio's body jolts in shock, and unintentionally their gazes meet. In a half-conscious state, Christina stares blankly while murmuring Rio's name. Extremely flustered, Rio immediately turns his face away. Christina, still disoriented, tries to sit up while asking where she is. That movement causes the bath towel covering her body to slip and fall to the floor. At first, she only stares blankly at her own body, but a few seconds later, full awareness strikes her. Instantly, her pale face turns bright red. In panic, she hurriedly pulls the towel back up to cover her chest, which briefly exposes the lower part of her body. She struggles desperately to cover herself completely, while demanding an explanation in a chaotic voice. This is the first time Rio sees the princess, who is usually always calm, completely lose control. Rio immediately apologizes repeatedly. He explains that Christina's entire body had previously been covered in blood, so he was forced to clean her, and he swears that he tried his best not to look at anything. Hearing that explanation, Christina turns toward the pile of her blood-soaked clothes. The memory of the execution day slowly returns. She then lowers her gaze and slightly lifts the towel to examine her chest. As expected, there is not a single mark from the spear wound. Christina clearly remembers that Duke Huguenot's spear pierced her chest. She also remembers speaking with Rio before her consciousness faded. The fact that she is still alive after receiving such a fatal wound truly confuses her. Seeing that expression, Rio, with a face full of guilt, promises that he will explain everything. He suggests that they move to another room to speak more comfortably. Rio asks Christina to take a quick bath so that she will not feel cold, while he leaves a bathrobe and prepares a change of clothes outside. About 10 minutes later, Christina emerges from the hallway with awkward steps, wearing the dress that Rio has prepared. Her face still carries a faint blush from the earlier incident in the bathroom. Rio invites her to sit down and offers her a cup of warm tea. After slowly taking a sip of the drink, Christina immediately asks how Rio managed to save her and why she is still alive. Rio then begins to explain that Vanessa and Flora arrived at the royal castle of Gallark and pleaded for his help to save Christina. Christina looks surprised because, according to her calculation, Vanessa should have arrived in Gallark exactly on the day of the execution. Rio admits that with ordinary transportation, they would not have made it in time. However, Lena used teleportation magic to bring them directly to the Bertram Kingdom, allowing them to arrive at the critical moment. Christina slowly realizes her own mistake. She admits that she deliberately arranged Vanessa's arrival schedule in such a way that Rio would not have time to carry out a rescue attempt. Hearing that confession, Rio immediately concludes that Christina must have made some kind of secret agreement with Duke Arbor before accepting the death sentence. Christina turns her face away for a moment before confirming that suspicion. She explains that her death was indeed an absolute condition for the future of the Restoration faction. Rio, feeling frustrated, cannot hold himself back from asking whether there was truly no other path besides death. With a resigned smile, Christina answers that if there had been a better option, she would never have surrendered her life willingly. Hearing that, Rio continues trying to find a solution, even going so far as to propose an extreme idea of kidnapping Duke Arbor and using him as a bargaining tool. However, Christina firmly rejects that suggestion. According to her, forcibly bringing down Arbor would not bring peace. The nobles who have enjoyed benefits under Arbor's rule would certainly rebel if their interests were suddenly taken away. Such a situation would only provide justification for the opposing side to retaliate and would ultimately pass down an even greater conflict in the future. That explanation makes Rio feel ashamed of his overly simple and hasty thinking. Even so, he does not give up and asks again whether there is still something he can do to help. Christina looks at Rio with deep gratitude, but her expression remains firm. She explains that creating political justification to seize power cannot be accomplished overnight, no matter how great the military strength might be. That is why she chose to sacrifice her own life. In a tone filled with regret, Christina finally conveys her only request to Rio, which is for him to return her to the capital of the Bertram Kingdom. Because if she continues living, then all of her agreements and sacrifices will become meaningless. However, their conversation is suddenly interrupted by another voice saying that they do not need to worry. Unexpectedly, Lena appears in the corner of the room using teleportation magic. She then smiles cynically while mocking Rio for apparently not telling Christina the truth yet. Hearing that remark, Rio's expression immediately darkens. He turns toward Christina, then lowers his head deeply while apologizing because he cannot grant the princess's request to return. Christina, confused, tries to object, saying that Rio has already helped her greatly and does not need to take responsibility for the political agreement that she made herself. However, Rio firmly shakes his head. With a gloomy face, he explains that all traces of Christina's life as a royal princess have now been completely erased. Christina becomes even more confused upon hearing that statement. Rio then reminds her about the legend of transcendent beings and their relatives or familiars. He explains that in order to save Christina's life from that fatal wound, he was forced to make her his familiar. Rio continues his explanation that as a familiar, Christina's status is now equal to that of a transcendent entity. People in the outside world will never be able to remember her, and she is also not allowed to interfere in the political affairs of any faction. Realizing that he has taken away Christina's normal life without her permission, Rio apologizes repeatedly once again. Meanwhile, Christina can only stand there stiffly, trying to process a reality that is far too shocking. Seeing Rio continue to blame himself, Lena finally interrupts casually. She states that Rio actually does not need to feel guilty, and that Christina should be grateful instead. Lena then explains her logic. Christina was already destined to die from a spear on the execution stage, so becoming a familiar was the only absolute way for her to gain a second chance at life. From Lena's perspective, this situation is actually very advantageous for Christina. Rio immediately responds in an angry tone, saying that if Lena had not interfered unilaterally, this extreme situation would not have happened. However, Lena calmly reminds him that without her intervention in moving the two of them, Rio, who was flying through the usual route, would certainly have arrived too late, and Christina would already have truly died. She also adds that if Christina had been saved without becoming a familiar, then the political agreement that was paid with her life would have completely collapsed. In such a condition, Christina, with her stubborn personality, would most likely have attempted to end her life again in order to carry out the Restoration faction's plan. Lena's words strike Rio's awareness hard. He realizes that from the very beginning, Lena deliberately concealed information and manipulated the situation so that Rio would have no other choice except to make the decision that Lena considers correct by her own standards. Rio bites his lip tightly to restrain his anger. realizing how little anticipation he had toward Lena's manipulative nature. As if reading his thoughts, Lena provokes him again casually, saying that humans often reject reality, even though they actually know that it is the best outcome. After seeing that Rio is able to swallow her harsh words and restrain his emotions, Lena claps her hands with a satisfied expression. She states that Rio has passed her mental test, because a transcendent being is indeed required to possess strong mental resilience. From that moment, Rio finally truly understands why Sora hates Lena's attitude so much. Taking advantage of the pause after that heated debate, Christina, who has managed to calm her mind, speaks again. She asks about the fate of her agreement with Duke Arbor's side now that her existence has been erased from the outside world. Lena casually reassures her that the agreement remains fully valid. All of Christina's political targets have been perfectly achieved. It is only that the important role and loyalty of the faction that were previously directed toward her have now automatically shifted entirely to her younger sister Flora. Hearing that explanation, Christina finally realizes calmly that there is indeed no longer any point in forcing herself to return to the Bertram Kingdom. Feeling that all matters have been settled, Rio then stores their stone hideout house into the space-time storage. After that, with the help of Lena's teleportation magic, the three of them immediately return to the kingdom of Gallark. So that is the recap of part 1 from volume 28 of the light novel Spirit Chronicles. How is it? Interesting, right? In the midst of a heavy dilemma between saving a life and bearing the consequences, Rio ultimately makes a decision that completely changes Christina's fate, as well as his own position as a transcendent being. For now, it feels like there is nothing else that needs to be explained, because everything is already leading toward a much greater development in the next part.